Hello everyone and welcome back to another installment from our webinar series, Straight from the Horse's Mouth. Lyttelton Port Company, the largest port in Aotearoa, New Zealand's South Island, wanted to tailor its reporting to better engage its main stakeholders. thinkstep-anz was brought in to help them develop an integrated report for 2022. Integrated reporting uses the concepts of capitals and value creation. Here's a sneak preview.
So there's the recognition globally that disclosures need to cover more than the dollars and the cents. There needs to be far more disclosure around environmental and social performance. Integrated reporting also talks about value creation. It talks about value being created. It talks about it being eroded. And it also talks about it being maintained. How do we continue to maintain value creation as an organization?
We ended up finding that using the capitals has turned out to be a really useful framework for us, because it does elevate certain areas in terms of thinking about them in value terms, and that can be really useful. So for us, it was really more about thinking differently about how we communicate about those things. I think our previous style of reporting was probably more in that annual report style, where we talked about a bit of the highlights reel from the previous year, and we didn't talk so much about the full business strategy going forward, and we didn't really articulate as much about the challenges. No, I wouldn't say for us it was hard. I mean, we did use a really simple process. We literally just whiteboarded it. We drew it up.
Kim and Martin talk about how they went about 3 steps in order to complete the integrated report. Firstly, understanding the starting point. Secondly, producing the 2021 interim report using capitals, and finally, producing the 2022 report using IR. With that, let's get started.
So, kia ora tātou katoa, ko Martin Fry toko ingoa. I'm Head of Impact and Strategies New Zealand for thinkstep-anz, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this webinar on integrated reporting, the how and the why. And I'm also delighted to welcome Kim Kelleher, who's Head of Environment and Sustainability at Lyttelton Port Company. Kia ora, Kim.
Tēnā koutou katoa, and kia ora. Martin, thanks very much for the invitation. Pleasure to join you.
It's great to have you. And just as a bit of background, we did work together by undertaking an integrated reporting workshop with the team at LPC last year, which was a great experience, and it was great to see the output last year, Kim, in your 2021 annual report, which started to follow the integrated reporting framework, but we'll get into the detail of that in a little while. I just want to set the scene by talking a little bit about how the kind of sustainability reporting frameworks and advice have started to converge in recent years. So there are a number of frameworks available. Probably one of the longest standing is the GRI framework, or the Global Reporting Initiative, which has a number of standards and quite a lot of detailed sector guidance. Very similar to GRI is SASB, or the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, which is an American equivalent of GRI. Again, a number of standards and sector-specific information. The SASB board and the integrated reporting framework have actually come together very recently to form an organization called the Value Reporting Foundation. And that's quite a fundamental shift because it starts using this language of value, and that's something that I'll touch on. But what we're also seeing is alignment with some of the other global kind of reporting initiatives, including the International Financial Reporting Standards. So there's the recognition globally that disclosures need to cover more than the dollars and the cents. There needs to be far more disclosure around environmental and social performance. We've obviously seen a massive focus on climate change. We've got the Climate Disclosure Standards Board, we've got CDP. These frameworks and advice are all trying to help reporters to achieve some common principles, which are consistency and comparability of disclosures, reliability and completeness of those disclosures. And one of the hardest ones to achieve is actually keeping all this into a concise report format. And I might ask Kim a few questions about how they manage that at LPC. So just to talk about the integrated reporting framework, I think one of the fundamental changes it brought in was a change of language. So integrated reporting starts using the concepts of capitals. So there are 6 capitals: financial, manufactured, intellectual, human, social and relation, and natural capital. And it gets organizations to look at those capitals and how they form inputs into a business organization and activity, how those capitals are managed through the organization itself, the outputs that are produced, and also the outcomes. So the broader environmental, social, and economic impact of the activities of the organization. Integrated reporting also talks about value creation. It talks about value being created. It talks about it being eroded, and it also talks about it being maintained. How do we continue to maintain value creation as an organization? So we'll start really with why report. If you look at the integrated reporting framework, it gives 7 guiding principles for integrated reporting, and I'm just going to touch on 3 of those with Kim by asking a series of kind of questions, and then we can tease out some of the activities and processes that occurred at LPC, and hopefully that will help guide those who are on the webinar to learn a bit more about integrated reporting. So the first one is the kind of strategic focus, this need to disclose the business strategy. And I think in particular, the integrated reporting framework is looking for organizations to start talking about short, medium, and long term. So it's no longer just an annual report. Here's what we did last year. And there are many reasons for that, but I think a significant one is actually stakeholder engagement. So my first question for you, Kim, is around which of your stakeholders kind of need this information? And do you think the concept of the capitals and this use of language around value creation is in the integrated reporting actually helps you in that stakeholder engagement piece?
Yeah, thanks, Martin. There's a lot in that question, I think. I guess for us, I would say just at the outset that LPC is on a journey to develop our integrated reporting. So the point we're at the moment is last financial year, we took our first sort of steps in the direction, and this coming end of this financial year, we'll be fleshing that out more. So I think we probably represent an organisation that has started to take steps, but is not yet fully realised all of the aspects of an integrated report, but we've certainly started the journey. And I think in terms of articulating the business strategy and the guidance that we derived from using the IR framework, we certainly found that many of our stakeholders relate to this. It has turned out to be valuable across a range of different stakeholders. But I would say that at the outset, the main driver was coming from our shareholder. So LPC is owned by a holdings company, Christchurch City Holdings, which also own a number of other large organisations in Christchurch, the airport, Orion, Enable, CityCare, EcoCentral. So we're part of a company's group, and the shareholder, the holdings company, is ultimately owned by the City Council. And so we received a really clear direction through that channel that integrated reporting was something that all of the companies should look to pursue. And that makes perfect sense. I guess with accessing capital and certainly the rise of sustainability-linked debt, that it makes a lot of sense to standardise and provide some sort of consistency across a group of companies using an internationally recognised framework It also gave us really clear direction about the expectations of the shareholder. And we still did, though, have a bit to grapple with in terms of how we still met the needs of many other stakeholders. So community, for example. The previous way that we were reporting was perhaps it was a different style. It was probably more story-driven and largely reliant on that. It was probably more looking back at what we had done as opposed to articulating the future. So now that we're doing that, sort of trying to articulate our business strategy clearly using the IR process and putting that out there, I think that's valuable beyond the shareholder, certainly. And it is something that the community stakeholders and other partners, certainly customers, are all really interested in, because now there's a one-stop shop they can go here to find out LPC's strategic direction.
Cool, thanks, Kim. What I like about this particular page is this clear articulation of a strategy that's built on a long-term vision. You know, we're increasingly seeing that we're looking we're not just looking 5 or even 10 years. We're now thinking in terms of decades, and I think, you know, that is a kind of, again, a global trend. There's all this talk about what we need to achieve by the middle of the century, 2050 net zero, et cetera, and that's starting to now be reflected in the approach that's been taken through, by organizations that are implementing sustainability strategies. But I agree totally with you that the IR framework does actually, it kind of, not forces you, but, in coming to grips with it and understanding that change in language, it kind of facilitates that internal conversation about how you're communicating to that broad range of stakeholders that you have. My second question is basically about this issue that we all face when we're looking at reporting. There is a potential to build real complexity into your disclosures because, let's face it, sustainability touches virtually every part of your organization, lots of different stakeholders, lots of potentially material issues across economic, environmental, and social. And in a way, you want to try and capture all that. So, but how do you do that without kind of confusing your readers? When you start looking at that holistic approach, what approach did you take to your 2021 report to keep it as simple as possible, but at the same time communicate the kind of depth that you are taking when you're looking at sustainable business practice?
It is tricky to sort of work through the full range of issues that you might want to express for an organisation. But I guess that's true of, most large organisations. And the aspect of taking a long-term view for us was sort of always there. We're a long-term organisation. We do always think and plan like that. We have to, as an infrastructure provider. But the shift to using the capitals as a way of sort of thinking about our business and thinking about where we grow or erode value was a real shift for us. And so fitting in to the capitals, all of the different aspects of our business was initially a bit tricky and did probably feel a bit unwieldy. But the way, in practical terms, that we approached it was we got a group of people from throughout the organisation in representing these main areas of the capitals. We got everybody together and we started articulating what integrated reporting was about, what we wanted to achieve, and really talking about each of these capitals and what we do that fits into them so that we could put it into our own language and see and make it relatable for us, firstly. And that really helped. And that did help and cut down in the complexity because initially it did feel a bit unwieldy. I mean, there is a lot of information that you can provide. So it is that element of providing, your professional judgment on what's relevant, what connects to the big risks and the material issues. And so we had that sort of process in the form of a workshop. I found it was really useful to have that mix of people from throughout the organisation. That really did add value. And because we were just starting out, it was great to sort of socialise with the wider business what it was that we were trying to achieve and what that meant for their areas of the business. So Yeah, in practical terms, that's kind of how we did it, but it is tricky for sure. We ended up finding that using the capitals has turned out to be a really useful framework for us, because it does elevate certain areas in terms of thinking about them in value terms, and that can be really useful, especially when we're talking about the environmental aspects and the social aspects, the human elements that we might not have thought about in those terms before, or that could have been overlooked in previous ways that we were thinking about those things or reporting on them. So we've ended up finding that the capitals approach has been a really good framework for us.
This is the classic integrated reporting business model that you see in lots of integrated reports. Interestingly, you've termed it your value creation model, and I kind of really like that, because there's kind of a hidden role, I think, for reporters to kind of continue to educate the readers of these communications around integrated reporting language. So actually integrate or adopting it in the language that you've used, I think is really useful. I also know that you actually put in a value chain model, and we'll come on to that shortly, because that's another element of kind of integrated reporting that seems to be becoming quite a common theme. But so we're getting into the how now. So this is how to actually produce the integrated report, and the guidance suggests there are 8 elements of an integrated report that you need to include. Again, I'm not going to go through all 8 because we don't have time, but the first one, we've seen the business model from LPC. You also produce this fantastic value chain model. I'm just interested to understand how you're seeing that adding value in terms of going beyond just the integrated reporting business model and looking at it through this value chain perspective.
Yeah, we made a conscious decision to include these 3 representations of the various models right up front in the report and consecutive, so that you could get a really good picture of the 3 of them together and how they worked together. And actually, I'll acknowledge the work of my colleague here, Pip Smith, who's our communications manager, who largely led the process of design and bringing all this together. She did a fantastic job of that, and she worked with the designers on bringing what we drew up on whiteboards and scribbled up to life. So we did make a conscious decision to put these in consecutively, because the added I think advantage of that in the end is that it provides a really nice, concise picture for somebody, whichever shareholder or interest that might come from, to flick through and get a really good picture. The value creation model gives some transparency on how we view the capitals and their outcomes. The value chain, this graphic outlines what we do and where that value occurs. And then the business model itself talks about our business strategy, what we're here for in the short and long-term goals, and outlines those main strategic areas of focus. So within 3 graphics, really, really consecutively, you can get a really good picture of how LPC grows or erodes value, and whatever the case may be, what our value proposition is, our whole value chain, and our business strategy to sort of deliver on that. So there's something sort of nice and succinct about that. And I think that we've derived some value from that in terms of then being able to use those materials for ongoing communications, and it fits together sort of really nicely, especially when we're talking to customers or other sort of corporate stakeholders. It's been really useful.
One of the challenges that I've always had in terms of pulling a report together, and again, it goes back to this question of complexity. How do you show the interrelatedness of the capitals? And you've used some color coding here, and I know in a past life when I was doing this in other corporates, we tried to use symbols and color coding and call out boxes to show that, well, yes, this is a narrative about a particular aspect of our business, but it's related to a lot of other things that we do. Did you use that color coding within your report? Is it something that you're looking to kind of develop in the future?
Yeah, and this, I think, is some of the wizardry that Pip and the designer worked on in terms of that was actually one of the things we had the designer involved in the workshops, in the initial discussions about integrated reporting. And I think that was a suggestion that you might have made, Martin, early on. And I think that turned out to be a great idea, because he was able to really get a good sense of what it was that we were trying to convey, and then was able to sort of work on some design elements, some recognisable categories that would make it obvious then when we were talking about infrastructure capital, for example, or when we were talking about natural capital. So we've continued to use those in a whole variety of communication ways, internally and externally, beyond the integrated report. So yeah, that was intentional, and has turned out to be, I think, really useful for conveying that consistency and where issues align.
The next question is around that communication of strategy. Going back to this particular graphic, which I like, but again, it comes back to that focus through integrated reporting on the communication of the short, medium, and long term. You've already said, for the investment kind of community, this is the most crucial kind of element of strategy. But how do you think it plays out with some of your other stakeholders in terms of what they're looking to see from LPC in that future vision?
Yeah, I think that will be something we'll get a little bit more of a sense of over time. Because this is the first one, we've certainly had some feedback already. I think and so far the feedback has been, say, for example, from we did a recent community survey, and that came out. The survey was done after this report was produced. And there was some comments around a broader range of issues that people were aware of than perhaps they would have been otherwise, because we were talking about them in different terms under the capitals, and also clearly articulating what the business strategy was around those things. And so, yeah, I think that it does have applicability beyond just the capital audience, but that also is a factor of how the report's put together, and the accessible language, and all of those aspects of making sure that it lands with various different stakeholders, and that can be, I think, challenging.
The last question really is about that. Well, to use integrated reporting language, it's that basis for preparation. So, it's kind of the starting point, if you like. And some of the audience today might actually be looking at integrated reporting for the first time. LPC were actually, when you engage ThinkStep, you kind of thought you were at a starting point, but actually you were potentially much further down the track than you initially thought. And that's what we find with a lot of clients, because obviously a lot of organizations are already developing sustainability strategies. So for those who are just starting and think that they're starting with a blank piece of paper, what's your key message for those?
Yeah, you've just reminded me of that, Martin. Actually, we were pleasantly surprised, I think, when we started digging into this with you, that we were a little bit better prepared than we thought we were in terms of the information that we had available to us and the work that we'd sort of already done. But yeah, and I would say that probably is true for many organisations who might feel that they're just really kicking off. But once you actually start doing the work around analysing the capitals and all of the various things that you've got going on against those categories, you do find that there is, a really broad range of initiatives underway. And so for us, it was really more about thinking differently about how we communicate about those things. I think our previous style of reporting was probably more in that annual report style, where we talked about a bit of the highlights reel from the previous year, and we didn't talk so much about the full business strategy going forward, and we didn't really articulate as much about the challenges and potentially some of the risks that the business faced as well. And so I think it's now a fuller picture, but I think a lot of organisations might find what we did was that you actually are already doing quite a bit. We were pleasantly surprised, I guess, by where we were at when we kicked it off. recognizing that we still do have a ways to go, and that's been I think for us it was the right call to do it in a stepwise approach and to sort of transition to full integrated reporting. I mean, many organisations might be able to kick that off right from the start, but we chose to do it over a couple of years.
From my experience, it takes so before I joined ThinkStep, I was with Mercury. We used the integrated reporting framework for at least 3 years before we thought we'd kind of got there in terms of, making the connections between the company vision, the business strategy, the actual activities within the business, and linking that to the IR framework with the capitals, the business model, etc. And in terms of our reporting, that itself, the physical report developed over time. We tried using icons and call out boxes and the sort of things that we've spoken about. But even after 3 years, you realize there's still opportunities to improve. And as you said, quite rightly, people are on a reporting journey, and that journey is going to continue. Yeah.
And if I can also add to that, it's parallel with the integrated thinking journey, isn't it? And I think that's where these two sort of parallel processes, which probably should be the same, but initially they're sort of slightly happening in parallel, where they start sort of creating momentum for each other, I guess, because we kicked off with integrated reporting. We're now talking about things in terms of value creation and capitals, and that's finding its way obviously into our business planning processes and our strategy development and the language that we use, across the business more commonly. So these sort of things which start out in parallel paths, I think over this, a number of years will become just the way things are done.
Kim, thank you so much. That's the end of the presentation. So now we'll go into Q&A. The first one I've got is actually, how long did it take to create the integrated report? So can you give an indication of the overall timeline?
I think from when we made a concerted effort, got a team together, had an initial workshop, it was a number of months. So it was, I think, about 3 or 4 months from when we had already looked at some areas of the business where the data existed and had started doing some of that background work. But from when we brought the team together and really started focusing on it as a project, I think it was 3 or 4 months.
Peter's asking, did using the IR model change the way you see the role the business plays in the community and for New Zealand?
I don't know that it changed the way that we thought about the business and the relevance to those areas, because we already give a fair bit of thought to that, and I think those things were firmly on our radar. We probably just didn't talk about that as much as probably the IR framework now provides us an opportunity to do that.
Question from Andrea. Wants to know if it was actually hard to translate your particular business into that the value chain approach.
No, I wouldn't say for us it was hard. I mean, we did use a really simple process. We literally just whiteboarded it. We drew it up, the ins and outs and the port in the middle and what we do and where we connect from the farm to something that lands, an export that lands on someone's desk, in Europe. So it wasn't difficult once we got our head around what it was that we were actually trying to do. I think it was just a case of actually focusing on it for us.
Cool. And I think one final question, and you may have touched on this, but who was actually on the team? So which functions of the business need to be involved? Well,
we had communications and engagement, HR, finance, environment, in infrastructure teams. In the workshop, we didn't directly have anyone from operations. We did have some of the commercial element represented. And we also had the designer come into the workshops and things as well. So I'm pretty sure that was the team that we used. We did have connections, though, in broader areas of the business. So people on that team needed to go out and connect with other areas to round up information and bring it together. But that was the core team.
Cool, Kim. I think we've come to the end of questions. I just want to say a huge thank you. I've really enjoyed the conversation. It's brought back all those memories of integrated reporting and producing annual reports. And I know it's usually at this time of year when teams come together with the greatest intentions of having a really solid and planned process in place to producing the annual disclosure. And somehow other things get in the way, and it becomes a bit of a panic towards the end. And hopefully, by getting this webinar out at this particular time when people are starting to think about it, we've actually helped some of the teams out there to make it a less painful process. So really appreciate your time and your insights. It's been a pleasure catching up again. Thank you, Kim.
No, pleasure. Thanks very much for the opportunity to talk with you, Martin.
Cool. And thank you to everyone who's logged in and been engaged through the process. A recording of this will go up onto the thinkstep-anz website. So if you think you've missed something, don't worry. We will provide a recording of it. And thank you very much indeed for logging on and participating. And I wish you all a very, very good afternoon. Thank you.